Hey everybody, welcome back to my channel. I am back with another video and I'm a little bit late, but this is my reading wrap up for the month of November. So if you're interested in seeing all of the interesting, large variety of books that I read during the month of November, keep on watching and make sure that you press that thumbs up button. Drop something in the comment section below. What did you read during the month of November? And if you haven't already, press that subscribe button. We hit 200 subscribers, which is wild to even think about, but thank you to everybody for all of the support. I really appreciate it, and the interactions. It's just been a really great journey on BookTube so far. So without further ado, let's hop into this video, my reading wrap up for the month of November 2020. So November was a really cool reading month. I read a variety of different genres, different age groups of literature, sort of, which was pretty cool. We're getting close to the end of the year. My reading was kind of all over the place, but it was really nice. It was really nice. So I started off the month and I picked up 2 children's books. So I picked up a part-time job. I started working at my local independent bookstore part-time. And so I have kind of been getting more into reading children's lit and keeping up on what's new and what's been out for children's lit and YA. And so that's definitely going to become a larger part of my channel, but I always want to make sure that I'm reading, diverse books, especially books by, authors of color, Black authors specifically for children's lit. And so I started off and I read Solway by Lupita Nyong'o, and Vashti illustrated this book. And so I felt like this was beautifully written. It was beautifully illustrated. It's about a young girl that is like feeling very insecure about the fact that she is dark-skinned. And, I think that that's something that you got to talk to young Black children about, like when they are very little, because they are going to come in contact with, unfortunately, colorism and the way that people treat young children, especially dark-skinned Black children, in life. I really hope that little Black girls especially will read this book and know that their Black is beautiful too. And it was such a beautifully illustrated book and the language was beautiful. And Lupita really did that with this children's book. And then prior to that, I read Dear Moon by Stephen Wonderly and illustrated by Maria Luisa DeGravio. And this is a book that talks about loss and grief. It's about a young boy who has a best friend who is sick, and it's the time leading up to their best friend going to the hospital for treatment. Inevitably something ends up happening to the best friend, but it really is talking about loss and grief. And I think that talking to children about loss and grief is a very hard thing. We don't necessarily always think about children experiencing loss, like young children experiencing loss, and more specifically, young children experiencing the loss of somebody that is close to their age. And so this book is definitely necessary. It's a great way to start the conversation. And I opened this book during one of my shifts in the evening. I cried. I literally cried. It was so beautifully written, and just just talking to a child about death, because it's something that they're going to experience, and you need to build a child's healthy relation. I personally think that you should build up a child's healthy relationship with death, because you don't want them to get older and then experiencing loss and then just be like stuck. Yeah, Dear Moon by Stephen Wonderly. That is the perfect children's book if you're trying to explain loss and grief to a young child. So after I read those 2 children's books, I talked about this series of books in my Nonfiction November video, which you can check out. Definitely check it out, because I talk about these in depth. I'm not going to, rehash what these are about. About Love by Bell Hooks, Ain't I a Woman? Black Women and Feminism by Bell Hooks. I also read Looking for Lorraine, The Radiant and Radical Life of Lorraine Hansberry by Imani Perry. If you want to hear more of my thoughts about and descriptions of all three of these books, head over and watch my Nonfiction November video. And so I haven't really talked about this much, and I didn't actually write a review for this on Goodreads, which I actually need to get to at some point, but I listened to another audiobook from Audible, and I listened to The Vanishing Half by Britt Bennett. And if you haven't heard of The Vanishing Half, I don't know where you've been this year. It was like a bestseller. Everybody was talking about it. Everybody was buying it. And oh my gosh, it is about two sisters, twin sisters. They grow up in this small Southern Black community where everybody is light skinned. And so like racial identity is like very important to them, and like the lightness of their skin is very important, which I mean goes into like another very interesting conversation. The two sisters, they end up leaving the town and they eventually go their separate ways when one sister decides to pass as white, marries a white man, and the other sister marries the darkest man that she can find and ends up living her life, continuing to live her life as a Black woman. There's a series of events that, their daughters end up being raised completely differently. One is raised as white and the other is very dark. It just talks about race, and it talks about this idea of passing, and it talks about acceptance, it talks about identity. And I think that what was so interesting about The Vanishing Half that I didn't even expect to read about when I got into it was it talks about passing not just in terms of race, but also gender. And you have one of the daughters, you have one of the daughter's daughters who ends up in a relationship with a trans man. And I was just like, this is like, you literally have trans representation in this book, and just talking about this. And I'm thinking that like the later chapters in the book are around the 80s, towards the beginning of the AIDS crisis, because that is sort of hinted at throughout the story. But it was just so much that made this story so good. So good. And I would definitely recommend checking out The Vanishing Half and the audiobook, specifically the audiobook. The audiobook was so captivating. It made me feel similarly to when I listened to Such a Fun Age on audiobook, where you're just drawn in, you're just following the story. But I definitely would recommend The Vanishing Half. Before I read The Vanishing Half, I kind of read both of these back to back, and I talked about them and the theme of the journey back home in another video, my video prior to this, so definitely check that out. I read Johnny Appleseed by Joshua Whitehead and Since I Laid My Burden Down by Brontes Purnell. Check out my video where I talk about these a little bit more in depth. But these are two queer novels. One is written by an indigenous two-spirit author, and the other is written by a queer Black man. So I definitely would recommend these. And I think to kind of end this, I gotta talk about Elon Harris. So I think in my Black Booktuber tag, I talked about Elon Harris and his books and, the representation that Elon Harris offers. And I had not read Elon Harris's, the more recent ones prior to his passing. And I'm sort of glad that I'm reading them now, because they are two of my least favorite Elon Harris books. I think that I have very complicated feelings about each one of these. So I think that I'll talk about Basketball Jones first. So this was definitely typical Elon Harris, talking about a young man that is forced to hide his relationship because he is in a relationship with a basketball player. And he's sort of forced to hide in the shadows because of love. It's filled with, you know, very like sexy characters, mouth-dropping secrets, and very, very shady queens, which, you know, it's always fun. It gave me the dose of drama that I really needed. I really didn't want to put this one down. Like, it's one of those juicy sort of like dramatic romance sort of novels that that you just don't want to put down. And because it's very like messy, which I can appreciate. I can always appreciate from Elon Harris. So I definitely would call it like a very like juicy page turner. It was entertaining. It was a much needed escape while I was reading all these different nonfiction books. What I would say about this, and this is where I kind of go into the next Elon Harris book that I read, was the ending felt really rushed. The main character was like holding on to all of this information that really could have changed things in the story, and that really kind of annoyed me. Elon Harris definitely has written better books, but I think for what it was, I definitely enjoyed this one. So I would recommend this if you need a good like juicy page turner. So I gave it a 3.5 out of 5 stars. However, read In My Father's House, and this was a posthumous release on the behalf of Elon Harris, and I'm assuming Elon Harris's estate. And I heard that somebody told me that somebody else had like finished this up and did like the editing or whatever and like finished up the book for him, but I'm not 100% sure if that is true. I'll probably like correct myself in the notes of this video, but this is probably my least favorite Elon Harris book. I will say that I always love the representation that Elon Harris offers, and the issues that he raises, but a bunch of, like, a very large part of this novel felt like a lot of drama that was building up, and then there was nothing. And it was almost like this attempt at crime fiction, which also happened in Basketball Jones. Elon Harris was almost trying to write like a crime fiction story, and it just didn't work. Elon Harris's strong point is writing about the lives of Black queer men. Diving into mysteries, diving into crime, diving into, unfortunately, politics, it's just not his strong suit. This was written, I think this was 2009, 2010. And he's sort of like he's sort of writing in real time during the election of Barack Obama. Have this character kind of talking about politics, talking about the election, and unfortunately a lot of it didn't age well. He brought up like the Chris Brown Rihanna situation with like the domestic violence and offered like a hot take on that, which I really didn't care for. And now when I'm reading, which I think now I kind of got to go back to Invisible Life and maybe reread it. His characters now that I'm reading it a little bit older, his characters, their views are very old fashioned, kind of slut shamey. And while I think that this was interesting, and I think that I was invested in the drama, I ended up being completely let down by the end. Like, I got to like the last 50 pages, and I'm just like, how are you going to wrap this up in 50 pages? How are you going to wrap up this storyline in 50 pages? The story follows this young man. He's wealthy. When he comes out to his father, he's like completely cut off. And then he ends up running this modeling agency. And he's mentoring this young man, and he ends up inviting this young man to model for this party, this gathering of like wealthy, like DL men in like the entertainment industry. And his mentee ends up like falling in love with this married actor, and everything kind of just goes down the drain from there. But I was just like, how do you wrap this up? You know, it didn't feel like it made sense by the end. So I don't know what was going on, but there are a few other Elon Harris books like that he wrote around this time that I definitely do want to check out just to see. But this just definitely was not my favorite. So that is everything that I read during the month of November. This was an interesting video, I will say. This was definitely an interesting reading month for me. So I hope that you enjoyed seeing what I read during the month of November. Make sure that you let me know what you read during the month in the comments section below. Press that thumbs up button and press subscribe if you have not already. I will see all of you in the next one. And always remember that you are loved. See ya.